At the Iowa State House, House and Senate negotiators continue to work on a tax reform compromise. We'll get a progress report from Senator Tom Vilsack and Representative Roger Halvorson on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for this program was provided by members of Friends of Iowa Public Television. 70,000 families helping Iowa Public Television inform, enlighten, and enrich your life. Join them. Additional funding is provided by the Daily Tribune of Ames, owned by Iowans who love Iowa and believe in a free press and in Iowa's community newspapers. This is the Sunday, March 31st edition of Iowa Press. Here is Dean Borg.
Iowa State House leaders have targeted the weekend of perhaps April 13th and 14th as the final days of the 1996 Iowa legislative session. Well, that's 10 working days remaining on the Iowa legislative calendar, and it really puts the deadline in doubt. And that's because one of the most important and maybe one of the most politically volatile items of the session still remains unresolved. Both the Iowa Senate and the Iowa House have passed their own versions of broad-based tax reform, and the differences are soon to be ironed out in Legislative Conference Committee. Now, tax reform is our topic today, and we welcome two legislators who are tracking the progress of the separate measures. They're Representative Roger Halvorson. He's a Republican from Monona, and he chairs the House Ways and Means Committee. And Senator Tom Vilsack is a Democrat from Mount Pleasant. He chaired the Interim Committee on Tax Reform. And also joining us at the Iowa Press table, two Iowa State House reporters, David Yepsen of the Des Moines Register and Mike Glover of the Associated Press.
Senator Vilsack, as you've heard, there's been a lot of bargaining at the Hill over tax cuts. What's your prediction? Will this legislature pass a significant tax cut, say in the neighborhood of $100 million?
I think there's a good chance of it. I think the fact that the House and the Senate have basically come very close to one another in terms of the total dollar amounts of their packages gives us the opportunity to really make a significant move in the way of tax cuts. The big issue is what taxes are going to be cut in what areas. There are significant differences between the House and the Senate.
Representative Halvorson, what's your prediction? Senator Vilsack talks about close in dollars, different on taxes. Can you pull it off, bring it together, and get a tax cut this year?
Well, I think we're getting closer in dollars, perhaps, but probably further apart on the issues. The House tried to concentrate on specific agenda on tax reform, tax cuts, rifle shot approach versus the Senate's more shotgun approach. Senate plan has 11, 12 different items in it. The House concentrates on three major items: indexing, inheritance tax, and pure property tax relief. So while we may be getting closer together on dollars, we're getting further apart on the issues because in fact, some of the money that's in the Senate plan, Legislative Fiscal Bureau clearly pointed out, isn't even tax relief. It just allows additional spending.
But if you're getting further apart on issues, there are only a couple weeks left. Can you pull it off?
Well, I wish I was as optimistic as Tom is, because I thought early on in the session the House and the Senate was going to get together. We were going to get together early. The House very early on, one of the first bills that came out of the Ways and Means Committee was our tax bill. We sent it over there on February 7th. Here it is almost April 1st, and we're still not in conference committee, and we still don't have the subject resolved.
Senator Vilsack, why is the Senate's version of a tax cut better than the House version?
Oh, there are a multitude of reasons, David. First of all, it's more comprehensive. Instead of just focusing on one or two types of taxes, we basically touch all the taxes. We have inheritance tax relief, we have property tax relief, we have income tax relief, we have use tax relief, and we also have a very important business tax relief portion of our program. Secondly, part of the program basically keeps the faith with local governments. You know, you're hearing an awful lot of discussion about the devolution of government power down to the local entities. The states made a promise many, many decades ago on the homestead credit, military credit, elderly credits, that they would fully fund those credits. We've not lived up to that promise. Our tax plan addresses that. We also touch on the inheritance tax. We also touch on the inequity that currently is in place with reference to leased vehicles. You know, many of our border communities where there are car dealers that are trying to lease vehicles are put at jeopardy in terms of being able to do business. We address that problem. And also, very importantly, I think we address the need for entrepreneurs and small business people to get relief with our Subchapter S and venture capital. And finally, I would hope that our package, when we ultimately reach consensus on this, does address the need for family farm tax relief. Senator Kibbe's worked on a livestock program which I think has great potential.
And how do you respond, Senator, to the criticism that the Senate tax bill is just a Christmas tree for special interests?
It's not a Christmas tree, David. The reality is that there are a number of problems inherent in our tax system. If you're going to deal with the Subchapter S issue, you have to deal with it directly. You have to put it on the table. If you're going to deal with inheritance tax, you have to put it on the table. If you're going to deal with the problem with use, livestock, etc., you've got to put these issues on the table. If I may just add, the House adopted a rule a couple of years ago with reference to conference that they would not discuss anything that wasn't in one or the other bill that was passed by the chamber. That basically forces us, when we talk in a conference situation, forces us to put everything on the table so we can discuss it.
Representative Halvorson, the flip side of that question is, why is the House version of the tax cut better than the Senate's?
The House's tax cut is true 100% tax cut. I'd have to debate Tom on the issue that this is tax relief because the homestead, for example, and he brought that up, doesn't do anything to lower any taxes. It just puts $23 million out there to offset what the counties have been allowing in the homestead tax credit. So there's no tax cut there with that $23 million, and the Fiscal Bureau has even recognized that and shows it in their bottom line. The Senate plan is, in all honesty, it's an election year, feel-good comfort blanket. And I can remember our kids used to carry around a little comfort blanket and they couldn't go to bed at night until they had that comfort blanket. Now that's basically what you have here. We tried to do a tax relief bill that was targeted, a rifle shot approach, one that was meaningful, identifiable. You could identify the taxes, indexing, inheritance tax, and $100 million of 540 relief. Now, that you can explain. You can identify it. The taxpayers can see what you did. You camouflage $100 million of tax relief by doing a car leasing program and all the other things and start new programs. The low-income approach is funding a new mechanism. The value added is even a new mechanism, which we haven't had, although the House and Senate has talked about that issue. But
let me just interrupt here. Senator Vilsack, you've heard his rifle approach and also somewhat of a critique of your proposal. Where is the middle ground here? Where is, and I know that you can't speak for a conference committee, but hypothetically, where do you think there's compromise possible?
I think there's compromise possible in the property tax aspect. I think there's compromise possible in the inheritance tax aspect. I think there's compromise possible on Subchapter S. I'd like to respond to one comment that Roger made, suggesting that the Senate plan is an election year plan. Roger, I would suggest to you that your plan is also an election year plan. The Republican Party has not has been very bold in basically saying they're targeting certain senators. Most of those senators are in urban areas. Your tax cut plan is a proposal that really benefits urban Iowa much more so than rural Iowa. In fact, it really hurts small rural schools, low property areas. We're concerned about that. We think there needs to be equity in any tax plan. That's why we prefer our approach.
I'll let him respond to that critique in just a minute, but I also want to continue to ask you, if you target those areas as possible areas of compromise, are you willing to give up the other things in your bill?
Well, I think it depends on the discussion and where it's headed. Obviously, whenever you get into conference, there has to be give and take in order for a compromise to be reached. We're going to expect the House to give in. They're going to expect us to give in. The question is whether or not we are willing and whether we can reach some middle ground that is acceptable and explainable to all the caucuses that are involved.
Representative Halvorson, you've heard what the possible areas of compromise are. Do you agree?
well, I think legislating is the art of compromise, and I think that if we are to have a tax relief bill, we're going to have a lot of compromise. But there's something going on in the Senate this year that is totally new that we haven't seen before, and that is a mentality that it's our way or no way. Now, last year we started the tax debate with House File 1, very first bill out of the box. We waited, the Senate came with their plan. We didn't do as the Senate has been doing this year, and that is ignore it and start our own bill. But yet that's what happened this year. We sent over a tax bill, it got ignored. They sent back their own bill. We've sent over subchapter S. They've ignored it. They send their own bill. We sent over auto leasing. They've ignored it. They sent it over in the tax bill. The point is that, this is not Nebraska. We don't have just one house. We ought to probably, when one house takes the lead and does something, the other body ought to consider it. Now we see some of these issues, and at least 3 of them coming back in the tax bill, rather than being dealt with on their own merits.
Senator Vilsack.
Roger, if we had followed that prescription, we would never have had the significant property tax relief plan of Senate File 69 last year. If I remember, your plan last year was an across-the-board income tax cut, which you abandoned.
That's right.
You finally saw the wisdom of the Senate approach and went to a property tax plan, which was incorporated in Senate File 69. I think we got the same situation here. I think you'll eventually see that there's a greater degree of wisdom and more Iowans that will be served by this plan. And one aspect of this plan that I think the viewers need to understand is that what we did several years ago during the crisis was to raise the sales tax. That is the most regressive tax that we have in this state. Now, what we are doing over the last couple of years is basically shifting that burden from those who pay sales tax. We are basically relieving the burden on the property tax and the income tax side. That's why I think it's important for us to have the renter's credit in there. Because these people are paying the increased sales tax, it's only fair that they get some benefit from property tax relief or income tax relief.
Let's go to Mike Glover.
Representative Halvorson, one of the key elements in the House Republican tax plan is reducing the uniform levy that local schools are allowed to charge at $5.40 per thousand. Critics argue that varies wildly from district to district, that some districts benefit a lot, that some school districts don't benefit very much. How do you respond to that criticism, and why is that the fairest way to lower property taxes?
Well, I think the 540, and we looked at other ways of doing the same thing, Mike, but the 540 is something that is meaningful and it's identifiable. People can see it. Every single property taxpayer in this state has to pay the 540 base levy. So whether it's commercial, residential, agricultural, industrial, all classifications are affected the same way across the base. And this is tax relief.
But isn't the heart of your argument political? It's just easier for voters to understand, even if it's not the best policy?
It's easier to understand. It's something that everyone can see that the legislature has given them tax relief. When you use the more shotgun approach that the Senate has and try to touch everybody, nobody sees any tax relief. And in fact, some of the new programs, the renter's credit that Tom talks about, the value added, the low income, these are programs that we've never funded before. This is new program. This is new spending. It's not tax relief. And so, I really have a problem even looking at the Senate plan and saying this is a tax relief bill. The House sent the Senate tax relief. 3 items, all 100% tax relief. What we're getting back is a hodgepodge of spending and some tax relief.
We've got a lot of specifics in this tax bill. I want to get in under the hood, as Ross Perot would say. Senator Vilsack, you put money into full funding of the homestead credits. Representative Halvorson has said that's not tax relief. That's state aid to county governments. How do you justify that as tax relief?
Well, basically, there are 2 reasons why we're doing this. First of all, we did make a promise to local government, which we need to keep. One of the problems that government has today is credibility. We're trying to maintain and retain credibility with local government. Secondly, local governments have, in the past, in an effort to make up for the underfunding of these credits, have increased property taxes to basically generate the same degree of revenue. It's anticipated and expected that many of these local governments will be able to reduce their tax because now the state is fully funding, living up to its promise.
Do you require local governments to pass that
No,
through?
and the reason...
What makes you think the courthouse types aren't just going to start spending it again?
Because they're going to respond to the same pressures that we are responding to in the legislature. The people have been very vocal, they've been very active, they've been very committed to this issue. They can do it on a local level. If we truly believe in local government, as we say we do, then we have to have the confidence in the people basically dealing with their local officials.
Representative Halvorson, a piece of both tax plans is reducing business taxes for something called Subchapter S corporations. In English, if you could, why is that a good idea and who does it help?
Well, first of all, I think you need to remember, who are subchapter S's. Generally, subchapter S's are smaller businesses. They're limited to how many stockholders they can have. They're startup companies in many cases, family-held corporations. What the House tried to do was to allow these small companies to use the same format that we have for C corporations, for regular corporations, in determining what income tax is payable. Normally, the subchapter S concept is one which the tax flows back to the individual, but you still have the corporate shell. What we're saying is that we think small business in Iowa ought to have the same benefits as large business in the state of Iowa, and that was basically our approach. Now, what we have coming back is one that's dealing only with value-added manufacturing corporations, touches only a fraction of the number of S-corps that are out there, and consequently only helps a fraction of those S-corps that are out there. Doesn't cost as much money, and they can start new programs with the rest.
Why not target businesses we want to help in this state, as opposed to just spreading it around to everybody, including businesses that don't need it?
Well, they're included in the House plan. I mean, we don't set them aside and say these are the only ones we're going to assist. We try to assist everyone that's a startup company, regardless of whether they add value or whether they're any other form of corporation or business.
I think it's significant to point out that the package at the House that Roger talked about sending over in February did not include specific reference to subchapter S. Secondly, the reality is that this tax proposal is really designed to create an opportunity to have capital for small business. Small business is starved for capital. We sent over a venture capital bill last year, which the House has refused to act on, that would enable and create opportunities for small business to access venture capital. This subchapter S program that we put together is designed to benefit those companies that are in the best position to pay the highest wages.
Senator, we need to move on to another element of this tax debate, inheritance taxes. Both parties want to do something toward eliminating or reducing the inheritance tax. It's just a question of how much. Senator, why do we care about that in this state? Why shouldn't we let rich people pay something on their inheritance?
Well, the reality is that the Senate plan that was passed yesterday is remarkably close to the House plan in the first year of operation. The Senate plan basically calls for $7 million of relief in the first year. In the House plan, it's $9 million. The differences are in the second year, where the House plan calls for a significantly higher amount to be cut. One of the problems is that if you cut taxes for the highest and the wealthiest of Iowans, it reduces your ability to fund subchapter S. It reduces your ability to take care of the renter's credit, which is important. It reduces your opportunity to address the special ed problem that we have in this state, where basically we're asking school districts to assume greater responsibility for special ed. It reduces your flexibility. That's why what we tried to do is have a balance in our plan so that we could basically address all of those concerns.
Representative Halvorson, the Senate wants to target a renter's credit and an elderly credit to help people who are renting and to help the elderly. Why are you opposed to that? What's wrong with helping people who rent and helping the elderly?
Again, it's not tax relief. This is a new program that we've never funded before.
Well, even if it's new, what's wrong with it?
Well, because we're talking tax relief. You can't have the title saying one thing and doing something else, and that's basically what you have here.
Mr. Halvorson, you also know that the reason the Democrats have put that in this bill is they believe that when the deal was cut to raise the sales tax, the governor welched on the deal. If that was in the original deal, you're going to raise the sales tax on low-income people, you're going to provide them a tax break, and he jerked the rug out from under him. Now, why don't you make good on the deal you cut back when you raised the sales tax?
I wasn't in the room, so I don't know what the debate was. There are those that feel quite strongly on that issue, David. But I think that first of all, let's take care of the tax relief, and then if we have money that we want to start new programs, let's be upfront about it and say, hey, we're going to spend more money this year. We're going to start some new programs.
Governor, Mr. Halvorson, don't you have some responsibility to clean up the mess they made?
Well, ironically, the governor doesn't necessarily like the House plan either, because it spends more money, and he would rather save it till next year so he can have one of his own.
Senator Vilsack, to suggest that the renter's credit is not property tax relief would suggest that renters don't pay property tax. When they pay their rent payments, they are in effect paying a portion of property tax. Those people are also the same people where the sales tax increase has hit them the hardest. In order to be fair, in order to be equitable, which is what we should be doing with this plan, these people need some degree of relief, Roger, and that's why we put it in the Senate plan. It is property tax relief.
Senator Vilsack, will the Senate pass a taxpayers' rights amendment?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I really don't know. I think that there's a growing concern about the Taxpayers' Rights Amendment, the Stanley Amendment. I would ask you, which version are we talking about? Since its inception, it's been amended and changed 15 times. We're beginning to carve out special interests, construction, highways not included. I'm not sure that the Senate is interested in passing a constitutional amendment when we have basically proposed another form of constitutional protection that will limit spending.
Senator, I want to get at this question of how serious the Senate is about tax cuts. I've heard you say you're not sure we even need them. We don't see much agreement out here on the table today. You have a lot of liberals in the Iowa Senate who, frankly, like to have government spending money. They think that's an appropriate role of government. Why are we supposed to take you at good faith here that there will be some tax cut coming out of the Iowa Senate?
Well, I'll tell you, David, I've worked very hard on the Subchapter S and the venture capital pieces. I've encouraged my caucus to take a look at the homestead issue. I've encouraged my caucus to take a look. In fact, I was the one who proposed, along with Senator Preed, the amendment that relates to the family farm tax credit and the ag land credit. I work with Senator Kibbe on the livestock credit program that he's putting together. I tell you, I deal with family farmers and small business people in my district. They are the ones that need relief. One of the concerns I have about the House plan is that a significant percentage of the actual dollars under the House plan does not go to individual people. It goes to large industries and corporations for whom we've already given a significant tax break last year when we eliminated the M&E tax.
Representative Halvorson, you mentioned the governor in the discussion earlier. What is the governor's role in all of this? He has proposed basically a one-year hold on everything while you study the property tax system. What role is the governor playing in this debate upstairs?
I don't think the governor has been real active in the tax relief debate, other than as I say to you,
every now and then.
Underneath these clothes are marks of a beaten body. No, the governor, I think, still holds to his belief that we need to have an income tax reduction in the state, and he sees both the House and Senate going off in a different direction, just as last year we went off in a different direction. While we solved a problem, and I supported, it was the right thing to do, the House started the debate, just as we started the debate this year again. But we're, both years we're using Senate files to try to solve it.
But Mr. Halvorson, the governor has warned against going too far.
Yes.
I mean, that the tax cut may be too big. You have evidence the economy is slowing. We have a new farm bill that's been passed in the states, in Washington. We don't know. It's 60 years since they've done this. We don't know what the effect of that is going to be. You don't know what the effect of federal budget deficit cuts are going to be. Why not a go-slow approach, Mr. Halvorson?
David, just the opposite. We have signs showing, and just yesterday I got a report from the Fiscal Bureau showing that we're at 8.4% growth over previous year.
But that
we're operating at a 4.9%.
That reflects what's happened last year in the economy.
And we see higher prices out there for agriculture.
Are for slower growth. The University of Iowa says slower growth in '96.
And I think they're right.
Either way, why isn't a go slow approach a more responsible one for the legislature to take?
David, at some point you have to say how much is enough. We're sitting here with a general fund balance of $200 million in the cash reserve account, emergency account, another $200 million, 100 plus infrastructure, and we're going to have an ending balance. With this tax cut, with the House tax cut, and the House spending at the level that we want to be, we're going to have a $128 million ending balance. Now, you got to ask yourself, how much is enough? At what point do you say to the taxpayers, well, I guess we have fulfilled what we set out to do, and that is develop an ongoing cash flow in the state. We've got that, but how much is enough?
Senator
House says
Vilsack,
it's enough.
How do you answer this question? It's all politics. A bunch of politicians at the Hill are trying to get on record as favoring tax increases, and this has nothing to do with tax policy.
Oh, I would disagree with that.
But how do you answer that criticism? You hear it all the time.
Well, I think when you take a look at the components of the Senate plan, it is really trying to address some of the fundamental problems we have in the state. We have a fundamental problem with the lack of venture capital for entrepreneurs. We have a fundamental problem that we're losing thousands of livestock operators every year because we've not addressed the concerns of family farmers. We have a fundamental problem with our special ed funding. We have a fundamental problem with our elderly population and our low-income folks in terms of the amount of rent that they have to pay in the housing situation. All of these are fundamental problems that we're trying to address. So I think this is a policy-driven debate. Sure, it's politics because it's an election year, but at the core of this is policy.
I wish that there was compromise in time limits, but they're pretty rigid, and I'm sorry we're out of time. Thank you very much, Representative Halvorson, Senator Vilsack, for being with us today in Iowa Press. As David said earlier, last Friday, the Congress passed and sent to President Clinton legislation that drastically changes both the philosophy and the application of the way the federal government deals with the production of food and fiber in this nation. And there are important political implications in the new Farm Bill. We'll talk about them as Iowa Press continues in just a moment.
Coming up next, the Iowa Press Roundtable. Joining host and moderator Dean Borg, David Yepsen, and Mike Lover is Kay Henderson of Radio Iowa. Here again is moderator Dean Borg.
Kay Henderson of Radio Iowa joins us now. Kay, what are the political implications of this new Farm Bill?
Well, farmers are not of equal opinion on this. To suggest that farmers all believe the Farm Bill is good or that they all believe it's bad is to suggest that all African Americans are Democrats. Farmers are divided in their opinions about it, which means it's a wash. There is no political fallout from this at this point. The political fallout will come 5 to 7 years down the road when there's a rewrite of the bill.
What is the overall objective here, Mike, politically and practically in this farm legislation?
Well, I think you have to look at this farm legislation essentially as a political document. I don't know if there's an overarching theme behind this farm bill. Short term, I think it's the politics of everybody wins, which is why we have a new farm bill. You're going to have conservatives are going to be able to say we got the government out of agriculture, and everybody likes to hear that kind of rhetoric, but the check's going to keep flowing. So it's going to be a pretty good year for farmers. So I think what you have to remember is farmers are a fairly small number in this state, and that farmers are already predisposed one way or the other. There's the conservative Farm Bureau type of farmers that like this bill. They're going to vote Republican, always have, always will. There's the liberal Prairie Fire, NFO type of farmers. They're going to vote Democratic and always will, and so they're going to vote.
I think the law of unintended consequences will be at work here. I agree with Kay and Mike. It may not have that much impact in November because it's just starting up, and it is true there are only 100,000 farmers in this state today. That's out of an electorate of 1.5 million, so numerically there just aren't that many people who are going to be touched directly by it. But we don't know what happens down the road. We don't know whether there'll be crop failures in this country. We don't know if the foreign markets will continue to be the boom markets that they are. I mean, this whole thing is predicated on the fact that farmers are now going to be able to sell all this crop all the crop they can grow abroad, and they don't need the protection of the government. If that should change, Dean, then that will change the political dynamic. But I'm not sure, given the Congress of the United States, as dominated as it is by urban interests, that farmers are ever going to be able to go back to a subsidy system like that.
Especially if there are very good years and they get their check in the mail and their $5 corn.
Okay, two people who are going to be involved, perhaps head-to-head, if they win primaries, in the Senate campaign, Senator Harkin and Jim Ross Lightfoot, both had a chance to weigh in on this. They voted in opposite directions. How can you explain that dichotomy in hoping to win Iowa's farm vote?
Well, one's a Republican, one's a Democrat. Tom Harkin has voted against farm bills in the past.
But President Clinton's going to sign it.
Well, he used to be advising President Clinton to veto it. He's no longer doing that. Jim Lightfoot will go around and tell farmers that the reason he voted for it, the number one reason, was to give them some idea of what's going on. Farmers have been very upset about the fact that they have no idea, heading into the planting season, what federal farm rules are going to be for farmers.
And President Clinton will sign it because there are a lot of farmers in Michigan, there are a lot of farmers in Illinois, and there are a lot of farmers in Ohio, and a lot of farmers in Wisconsin. He carried all four of those states and needs them in November.
The safest politics for any politician is to always vote against the Farm Bill and always criticize the Secretary of Agriculture. You can't lose.
Thank you for the insight. We're going to be covering this, I'm sure, as the implications weigh out. And that's it for this week's edition of Iowa Press. I hope that you'll join us next Sunday at noon and 7. Until then, I'm Dean Borg, and thanks for being with us today.
Funding for this program was provided by members of Friends of Iowa Public Television. 70,000 families helping Iowa Public Television inform, enlighten, and enrich your life. Join them. Additional funding is provided by the Daily Tribune of Ames, owned by Iowans who love Iowa and believe in a free press and in Iowa's community newspapers.